internationally as well. Those broadcasts are still accessible to members of the public. We also have a workshop that we have done earlier this year to cater specifically to the data protection officers to help to build their capacity by calling on the expertise from seasoned practitioners within the country. But throughout, we have had different programs tailored towards engaging the public and informing them regarding data protection, whether these are events and activities that have been initiated by the OIC or events and activities that we work together with third parties in order to promote and facilitate data protection. Currently, for example, for this year, because we recognize that privacy is something that you have to ingrain in persons, you have to build as a culture, we have looked at focusing on instilling a respect for privacy in our youth so that they grow up knowing that data protection is always to be a consideration in all their activities, both personal and professional. And so our national initiative for this year involves a school tour that will see us engaging senior students at both the primary and tertiary level to impart information regarding data protection. And that has been quite a success. In addition, the OIC has for several years operated various social media platforms through which we constantly disseminate information in addition to the occasional publications in traditional media. So we have been actively reaching out to both public and private sector in relation to data protection.
All right, let me come back to I know you have suspended registration. What is your timeline to resume that process?
The resumption of registration we foresee based on where we are now. Straight answer would be the end of September at latest.
And that is dependent on your ability to recruit the staff that you have a challenge getting.
It would turn partially on that. You had asked
and you
earlier,
think we're at the end of July,
yes.
And you think the end of September is realistic?
Well, you had asked earlier, Chairman, about the approach that we are taking. Having sought on several occasions to recruit, having attempted headhunting and had no success, what we are currently engaged in is procuring a finance consultant. That would allow us to get somebody in who has the necessary skill and competency, but without being limited by the current pay scale that is attached to the post. And so through that method, we believe we would be in a position to engage a CFO overall to head the department. We already have quite a bit of finance and accounting support that has been provided by the OPM to date. They already assist us significantly with the processing of payments to be made for and on behalf of the OIC. And we do also have a proposal for support to address the receipting and collection of registration fees.
So let me ask you, so currently the payment of these fees is done manually and then proof provided at a later date. Is that, or you have moved away from that to a fully automated system?
The aim is to move from the process of paying via deposits into the bank account and submitting proof of payment to online payments linked to the registration portal. What we're doing is actually integrating the e-commerce functionality into the registration portal, sorry.
Who are you engaged? Is eGov, it's not called eGov again.
ICT
but
Authority.
Yeah, you're engaging them on that?
They are working together with us for that, and we will be proceeding with the PayGate facility that they offer.
Okay. All right. Member Brown has a question. Go ahead, Member.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Barkley. I don't know if this was asked before, but I wanted to just understand, for how long has this suspension been in place in terms of companies being able to apply and have good standing before the Office of the Information Commissioner?
Since the start of the current registration year. So the second registration year would have ended on the 30th of November last year. on the 1st of December, we did not commence registration for the 25-26 registration year.
Okay. I understand, and you have indicated that staffing is a principal reason for the suspension. Is that the case?
No, it is a twofold issue. They have to go hand in hand. So on the one hand, there is the upgrade that is being done to the system to facilitate the online payments in order to prevent us compounding the existing issue of a backlog of registration and as well as an accumulation of fees that are not fully and finally accounted for. The second part of it is, well, the staffing issue would relate to that second part.
So it's staffing and your computer database, that's what you're saying?
Not the database, the...
Your payment system?
Yes.
In another forum, I had gathered that there were some enabling regulations that were still outstanding that would give further effect to the effectiveness of the Office of the Information Commissioner. Is that still an issue or that has been cleared?
Well, I'm not sure the specific forum that you mentioned. The Act does provide for various regulations, ministerial orders, as well as for the OIC to issue guidance and directives as to how exactly the Act is supposed to be implemented and how data controllers are to comply. So in any regulatory system, ideally, all those things would need to be in place for it to be fully and properly functional. Are they in place?
That's what I'm asking. Are they in place?
It is a work in progress. As you may be aware, we are less than 5 years old, and whereas you do have some legislation that has been passed for years without any regulation being passed under them to give them proper effect, the Data Protection Act has already seen the passing of 3 pieces of supporting regulations. So in that regard, we are significantly advanced as compared to other regulations locally, as well as compared to some other jurisdictions where either act has not been passed or it has been passed but given no effect or given effect without any regulations in place. So is there additional regulations or orders that would need to be made? Yes, and it is anticipated that those would be done over time as the jurisdiction and the regime matures.
All right. You mentioned September in terms of your the return of the platform to allow for companies, because I was once seated in the private sector, and you know, we were highly frustrated in terms of even boards and private sector boards have been pressuring their management teams to get you know, registered and have good standing with the Office of the Information Commissioner based on the Data Protection Act. As the chairman asks, you are telling the country and the committee today that you will be ready as of September to ease the frustration because the law is in effect despite the suspension, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So you will be ready as of September to ease the frustration of hundreds of private sector entities that want to be registered, want to be compliant, want to protect their data, want to be in compliance with the Act, but based on the situation, is not able to do so, no fault of theirs. So you're saying that as of September, we should be back on track.
All right. I'm going to answer that in 2 parts.
Yes.
First and foremost, in terms of readiness for compliance and the implied statement made regarding persons' fear of not being compliant, as I would have mentioned before, your registration is not a measure of your compliance. And so I would want to shift the focus from that. And this is in no way saying that once registration is possible, persons should not register. You have a legal requirement to register that you ought to honor. However, notwithstanding the suspension of registration, all your obligations with respect to the protection of personal data still obtain.
Oh, that is clear.
And so persons who are looking to registration as proof, for example, to the public or their clientele that they're compliant, are perhaps looking the wrong direction.
No,
What
I
they
mean,
ought to be looking...
sorry, Ms. Barclay, I understand what
Yes.
you're saying, but the country, the government has set up an institution and a framework to indicate compliance. So yes, I accept what you're saying in terms of it is the natural thing to do of private sector entities and anybody who is holding persons' private data to ensure that you are holding them responsibly, you're utilizing them responsibly, you are carrying through all the responsible way of what you should do as it relates to private data. But there's a framework that has been established by law to ensure that there is a regime that guides this. So the question I'm asking is, yes, I understand your explanation in terms of responsibility by companies, but I want to hear from the entity that is charged with ensuring that persons are held accountable to do the right thing, if they will be ready as of September, based on your statement to the committee.
All right. In that regard, my statement is not a guarantee. I don't know which head of entity in the current climate, with all the frustrations and limitations of the public sector, can offer such guarantees, but I won't. What I would say is that notwithstanding our challenges, our limitations, our constraints, we have a dedicated team working within the OIC. We have the support of the OPM and the Ministry of Finance, at least based on our discussions, as well as several stakeholder partners, including the provider of the solution, that give us sufficient reason to believe that we will be able to make that timeline, all things being equal. There are numerous variables that could change from time to time, and we have seen that before. When the registration was suspended on the 1st of December, we had reasonably hoped to have everything in place and be able to resume for the new financial year on the 1st of April. It is now July.
Ms. Barclay, let me help you.
Yes.
Based on my knowledge of the public sector, I think January 1st is probably more realistic. We're at the end of July. You go into August, where people tend to take holidays. Your issues are structural. I understand the short-term solution where you're seeking to get a consultant to cover the responsibilities, but I also know that has to go through a whole set of processes. And I know you don't want to be held to a September date that you may not be able to deliver, because there are many variables outside of your control.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm saying September is basically 2 months from now. No, a month and a bit, quite for a bit.
Yes.
And unless the consultancy, I don't know whether it has to go through procurement processes, whether it has all of those things take time.
Yeah. And Chairman, I understand the limitations within which you are working, Ms. Barclay. But I want to therefore ask the Permanent Secretary, because data protection is a big issue globally and is a big issue for Jamaica. The Office of the Information Commissioner comes under your ministerial, the ministry's responsibility, and ultimately OPM, being that you're a permanent secretary. What steps are you taking to ensure that this fundamental regime, at the last meeting, I indicated the 49 million cybersecurity attacks, up fourfold from 2022, that Jamaica was, exposed to and actually had. What steps is the ministry giving to support the Office of the Information Commissioner to get into that situation where they can now cause the country to be ready to in this age and to deal with this issue?
Thank you, Member. And through you, Chair, Chair, I appreciate your thought that Information Commissioner might want to give herself some more latitude. But, Member, to your question, we provide every support the Information Commissioner requires of us. Obviously, she has her own mandate, but where she needs our input. So, for example, she mentioned earlier that the ministry's principal financial officer, and already we have several shared services. That principal financial officer is made available to assist her. I can tell you the information commissioner wanted to go it on her own with that when she got someone temporarily in, and we guided that we can still provide her with the support of the principal financial officer until she's sure she has someone stable in that post. Similarly, when she proposed that she could try with a consultant in order not to extend the period, she has the support for that. Obviously, the compensation for the consultant would have to be approved by Ministry of Finance. But because it comes under a different regime, we are fairly confident that we'll get the support of the Ministry of Finance in that regard. Also, I've supported her initiative to do some more restructuring, looking at her structures, because the approach is taken, and Chairman did mention earlier that an entity like the TIU could assist, but generally they like if the entity itself do a review, make some recommendations, and then they can see if it's appropriate. And I have supported the Information Commissioner in her desire to also get someone to look at her structure. So we are, the Information Commissioner does her assessments and indicate how she can execute her responsibilities, and whatever support we can provide, we do so without seeking to overly influence and dictate how she carries out her job, because I'm a data controller as well, and she has to monitor me as well from a data controller's perspective. So she has one of those jobs where she has to monitor everyone, including her oversight ministry. So I'm careful not to dictate her processes except where I see I can help, such as with the principal financial officer. I offer that to her, and then if she accepts, I provide that support. And whatever additional support she seeks, if we're able to, we will provide it through you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Member Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I must tell you, reading the response here and the frustrations in getting the office established, including the untenable physical environment and the challenges related to compensating qualified employees, etc. I feel very sympathetic to any frustration that the Information Commissioner would be feeling. And I wonder if she could, before I go into my substantive question, if you could say, when were you employed? How long ago?
The 1st of December, 2021.
2021.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on 5 years
Yeah.
this year. And to be, given that responsibility for almost 5 years, and you're struggling 4.5 years later to get the office properly staffed up, etc., I think is really unacceptable, Mr. Chairman. And I have to say, Permanent Secretary, this does not feel like a priority for the government. If 4.5 years later, we can't just get a proper physical environment for the office, we can't get it staffed up, even at what sounds to me like a fairly skeleton level staffing, even the current establishment, but we can't even achieve that. I'm very concerned that this office and the responsibilities of the office are not being given appropriate prioritization by the government. But I specifically want to ask you, in the note it mentions that the enforcement provisions, the penalties, that element of the law which would bring that into effect is not yet operationalized. So at this point, we're talking about voluntary compliance. And realistically, laws generally do not operate retroactively under our constitutional arrangements. So is there any recourse for persons currently under the current law, which if their data is exposed, particularly in a way that adversely affects their banking information, their personal security, things like that, do they have recourse under this law now, civil action, to cause breaches, to at least be able to seek compensation for breaches of the responsibility of the data controllers?
Yes. The provision or creation of certain offenses, criminal offenses under the DPA did not in any way abrogate or suspend the rights that persons have as individuals to redress. And so the pursuit of civil action and redress in the form of compensation or otherwise through the courts is still available to any aggrieved and affected data subject. The other thing that persons need to be mindful of is that the nature of data privacy and protection, and particularly the risks and threats that affect it, are such that it's not limited to the DPA in terms of the possible implications or liability. And so what you find is, for example, a large number of data breaches result from issues with users, things that are internal to organizations. And persons must be mindful that in that regard, insofar as they might constitute any kind of misconduct or other wrongful action within an employment context, any data controller still has their various approaches to treat with that as against a responsible employee. And those actions can still be taken and should be taken. Now, outside of that, you can also look at the fact that much of the manifestations of these risks and threats result from some type of cybersecurity incident. Now, in that regard, there are cybercrimes that may come into play that can be otherwise prosecuted regardless of the data privacy issue under the DPA. And so the fact that the enforcement provisions in the DPA are not yet in effect does not mean that there is a free-for-all for data controllers to operate as they deem fit and disregard the rights and interests of data subjects, because there is action that can be taken, whether by the data controller, as against, as I said, a culpable employee. There are actions that can be taken, for example, by representative associations and bodies. So just to give an example, in relation to attorneys at law, since the coming into effect of the Data Protection Act, the General Legal Counsel and the Jamaica Bar Association have gone at length to advocate the need for attorneys to ensure their compliance, because non-compliance with the DPA can constitute a breach of certain canons of ethics for attorneys. And this is a similar case for other professional organizations as well that have their own code of conduct or canons that persons, members have to follow. And so there are consequences where your failure to comply with the DPA in any way can constitute misconduct in a professional respect for which you can be penalized. And this is in addition to, as I said, any criminal offenses that may be constituted for the action leading to the breach. So persons do need to be mindful of that.
Two more questions, Mr. Chairman. Well, really one more for the Commissioner, but I'd like the Permanent Secretary to answer to my first observation, or to respond to my first observation about a lack of prioritization of getting this office functional, fully functional. But for Ms. Barclay, there was a lot of, let me just say, confusion or misunderstanding when this act was originally, when it came into effect, that many persons who were making, what's it called, information requests.
Access to information.
Sorry?
Access to information request.
Access to information, thank you. They were making access to information requests from various government agencies, were being denied that information because of concerns related to the Data Protection Act. And I know I read at the time in the media that you made a statement to the effect that that was incorrect, that was an incorrect interpretation by those agencies.
In fact, I think there was a matter that came here probably 2 years ago, and the MDA had made that observation, and you're correct. I think the OIC clarified
it,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, since that, it was two agencies, I remember. One came here, but there were two agencies that had used it at the time as the reasons to not respond to the access to information, at least. Have you had some sort of familiarization, training for these ministries, departments, and agencies to help them understand that the Data Protection Act is not an effective, is not a gag clause, so to speak, or one that renders that neuters the Access to Information Act?
I know we have worked together with the ATI unit at some point with respect to a sensitization session. We have done in the past, I believe, some form of publication, whether through our social media site or otherwise regarding it. We have also spoken at other activities by MDs that address the issue of access to information. And from time to time, we actually do have MDAs that would reach out to us for some kind of guidance or feedback as to a particular approach in treating with a matter. I'll use this opportunity, Member and Chairman, if I can, just to make some general points in that regard. A lot of the confusion stems from persons looking at information in its most general and basic form and failing to distinguish between the different types of information. So whereas there is some amount of overlap and it can have legal implications, there is a very distinct distinction between the Data Protection Act and what it protects and the Access to Information Act and what it provides. Essentially, the DPA is looking at protecting the privacy of personal data, which is specifically defined. Meanwhile, the Access to Information Act is set up to enable persons to have access to official records. Now, that is also specifically defined under the ATI Act. Where the overlap comes in is where the official record of a public body consists of personal data that the Data Protection Act protects. Now, in that regard, persons need to know that the DPA was not set up to frustrate neither the objectives of government nor the objectives of any other act, and hence why it makes allowance for necessary tasks to be conducted, notwithstanding. What it requires is for certain steps to be taken to protect personal data as far as is necessary based on a particular process. So if it is that an organization receives an ATI request, they have a duty under that act to facilitate it and to provide the information as far as possible without breaching an individual's privacy rights under the DPA. Now, that may mean in some circumstances that you have to anonymize certain data. It may be that you have to redact certain data before you issue the information. It does not mean that you can wholesale say, no, you are not providing the information. You must also be mindful that personal data is personal. It attaches to a person, an individual, whereas official records may speak to a person in the legal sense, for example, a registered company. The DPA does not protect specific details relating to a company per se, a company name. And so we have had to clarify those types of distinctions where, for example, an ATI request would require disclosure of a company name and persons are using the DPA to protect that. Persons have to be mindful as to how they tread while balancing their obligations under both legislation.
But even personal information, for example, a lot of personal information is published on a voter's list. You know, I can get the name, address, a couple other fields. They used to give more. I noticed the EOJ has anonymized some of the data. You can ask them for things like breakouts of age, etc., but not by they used to, in the old days, you used to be able to get date of birth of your voters, but not anymore. But they will give you, you know, if you want, what cohort is between 18 and 25, 25 and 35, and so on. But there is a certain minimum amount of personal data which I don't think there is, you know, risk to identifying this person lives in this community at this address, which is published every 6 months by the EOJ. So would that be a sort of general guide that if the personal data would already be contained in a voters list or other similar type of public databases, that would be reasonable to also release the same?
I thank you for raising that, member, because the Act actually speaks specifically to those types of situations. Now, firstly, we have to be mindful that the DPA does not operate in isolation. We have numerous legislation that are in effect in the country, and they still obtain. So where, for example, there is a requirement for publication of certain information under another legislation, that requirement still obtains. So that is the case, for example, with respect to the publication of the voters list, as you mentioned, as one example. The Act does speak to where information is already available and maintained as part of a publicly accessible registry. The Act also speaks to certain exceptions where the information has been made public already, for example, by the data subject themselves in any platform or format. And so essentially, if it is already public information, then the requirements are treated a little differently as it relates to the obligations of the data controller. But let me just make a point as well, since you raised the example of the voters list, and it's only an example. When we pass legislation, it has not just implications for our citizens, but implications for the operations of other laws. And so one of the things we have to look at is what law and where and which provisions may need to be amended as a result of this particular legislation. Now, there would have already been some provisions that speak to how the DPA interfaces with certain other acts, but that would have not necessarily come from a wholesale review of all laws in operation in Jamaica. So it is an opportunity then for the Parliament to consider to what extent there may be a need for an overall review of legislation as it relates to what persons can publish, what persons can utilize, what information is required to constitute government records, how those things are supposed to be kept, just to make sure that all our acts are working in sync and support and supplement each other.
I'm yielding, Mr. Chairman, but the Permanent Secretary still hasn't answered my question.
Chair, may I? Thank you, member, for the question. I think your concern is that the staffing challenges that continue shows a lack of priority. Chairman, member through chairman, I don't know if that's the best characterization of the situation. So the priority would have been demonstrated by the fact that, notwithstanding the best advice, that it would take time, in fact several years, to put all the provisions in place for the Data Protection Act to be fully in place, a priority was given to enabling those provisions that could be enabled in the instance, to do it in a phased way. We would start by advising the public of the existence of the Act, then opening for registration, and as the Information Commissioner indicated, working on things like the regulations and the processes that would allow for enforcement in due time. So that was a deliberate phase process. You're correct that the staffing has been inadequate, but there's been a process, and I don't think there's been any undue delay. So for example, a structure was approved, and the Information Commissioner, having reviewed it, thought immediately that it was inadequate, made representation, but she did not just sit on that. As she indicated, she has been trying to fill the posts, with the compensation levels that exist. And there are times when she got persons recruited, and in short order, they'd be attracted away by other entities. She gave 2 examples earlier. And the representation still has been made to try and get the existing posts, reclassified at another level. And she is doing an even wider organizational restructure, because remember, you did point out, I think it was you, that even the staff that she now has approved is really inadequate for the extent of work that she will undertake. She's also trying to minimize the amount of manual processes required, as she explained, by not using the bank accounts and transfers and verification, but getting automated processes. These are in the process of being developed. During this sitting, Chairman, there would have been challenges, which the Auditor General would have noted, when in another situation and based on urgency, some processes would have been expedited. And, a part of what the Auditor General quite rightly found out is that sometimes, notwithstanding urgency, processes need to be done appropriately. The Information Commissioner is being very diligent, and she's getting support, as she said, from the ICT authority in developing the systems needed to make sure that she has a robust system. But the phasing was intentional, and when she got a staff structure approved, she tried her best to fill it. It takes time to recruit, time to see if you can retain the people, then you lose them, then you have to start recruiting again, Chairman. You'd be surprised how much time passes when you go through that process. But to your question, we deliberately phased the implementation of the Act because we knew that it would take time to enact, to implement, and be effective with all the provisions. So that was a deliberate part of the process. And having proven by repeated failure to recruit and retain people that the structure does not work, we're again working with our partners at the Ministry of Finance to see if we can get appropriate structures, and if we can finally retain people of appropriate competence and qualifications. Chairman.
Thank you. Member Corporate.
I don't know if I need to say more. I think pretty much everything I wanted to say was covered, but we're looking at this act, and I think anything that is new, we will have challenges with anything that is new. I was a part of the Data Protection Committee when it passed in 2020. And again, as a permanent secretary said, it took 2 years. We wanted to do it on a phased basis. It was done on a phased basis. And I still, just listening to my colleagues, I'm recognizing as well that they are also not understanding what the data protection is all about and what it's supposed to do. I'm hearing about cybersecurity attacks, etc., and not fully understanding, I guess, what the data controller is supposed to be doing. I believe that this is a good time, the fact that it's now been 5 years, to really possibly step up the public education so that I know that I do hear it on a particular radio station with a certain gentleman speaking about the Data Protection Act pretty much every week. And so I think it's important for all of us to really fall in line and understand. And I must commend us as a country for the steps that we have taken, because there are other countries in the Caribbean who have not. They're not where we are. And yes, we are larger. We're Jamaica, and usually we're the leaders. But I also have to commend us for what it is that we have done to pass this Data Protection Act in 2020, and to give people time to, get on board with this in the 2 years that we gave them. And so I think what I wanted to say really is, just from listening to everything and just even conversations in the public, I think maybe more. I know that you mentioned about public education, that you've been doing that, but maybe a little bit more visibility for persons to understand exactly the importance of different companies. And I heard even the chairman mentioning about members of parliament. I think that was also a concern of mine when I was in the committee, to find out, since we collect data, do we need to be? So that was, you explained that, and I think a lot of Jamaicans do not understand. So what I would suggest really going forward, and if we can move away from this topic, we've spent like an hour on this topic.
It's very important, doing it.
I know it's important, but I don't think we're going to cover everything. I didn't interrupt you. I don't think we're going to cover everything about the Data Protection Act in this session. So I think it's going to be very important for us moving forward, the fact that we're looking possibly at a review now of the Act to really step up the education on this for persons to understand exactly what it is that we're trying to do and how we're trying to protect the Jamaican citizens.
For me, final question, you had raised before the lack of the enforcement, either regulations or I don't know if it's legislation required. Could you just enlighten us on what is required to move to that enforcement stage, and whether that is part of the phasing in? Just that specific question on enforcement. And when.
So the enforcement of any legislation requires, first and foremost, the act of bringing the relevant sections into effect. That is what I would call the easy part. The reality is, for enforcement to be effective, then you need to have the necessary frameworks in place for you to carry it out. And so there is an enablement and an empowerment that needs to take place with respect to all the parties, all the participants within the regime. So as it relates to the OIC, definitely there is some amount of work that needs to be done for us to be in a position to fully and properly exercise those powers. And that includes some amount of capacity building in relation to the staff. It does include in terms of, again, having the necessary ICT infrastructure in place to enable us to operate with efficiency in carrying out those actions. It will involve in terms of having the necessary arrangements in place to give effect to the interactions between us and other persons within the enforcement procedure. It also would require, outside of OIC, as I said, having other parties ready. So there is the JCF, which if these are criminal offenses, who would need to be very much aware and educated as to what constitutes an offense and how to approach it in terms of laying charges. There is the judiciary that has to be ready and able to deal with DPA offenses, which would be new to it. There is, for example, the Dispute Resolution Foundation. What a lot of persons don't know, the Act actually does speak to and provide for mediation of disputes as between data subjects and data controllers. So persons have to be not just educated, but trained in how to treat with data protection offenses when they do arise. So persons are pushing for enforcement, and the easiest thing would be to bring the section in, but the question would be, then what? So,
But what is I appreciate that, and I mean, I personally was very involved in the cyber crimes legislation, and it was a similar type thing. New legislation, had to educate DPP, police, etc. But what is the projected time frame? Given everything you have said, is it 18 months, 24 months? What would be if you look at your goal as to getting this done, what would that time frame be?
at this point in time, I would have to say realistically, approximately 2 years.
Okay.
Anything less than that would be quite a challenge given the current state, not just of the office, but also of the other interested parties that would have to play a role.
Okay. I see Member Witter and then Member Miller.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When I walked in, I heard you mentioning the impact of other legislations, existing legislation, and how it would impact your performance in terms of what you are seeking to achieve. What kind of impact does the Access to Information Act, how does that impact your existing challenges that you might face?
Well, we had, the question was earlier raised, and I had explained to the committee the distinction between both legislation as well as how they overlap and what steps the office had taken in order to elucidate the position and provide guidance. So perhaps if Chairman would allow, we could have that discussion separately.
Yeah, Member Witter, she had gone through a pretty detailed explanation on that just before you came in. So I would, in the interest of time, I wouldn't ask her to go through it again. But we can, the minutes can provide the details on that.
No problem.
Member Miller?
Earlier, member alluded to persons not understanding the role of the data control and its relationship to cybersecurity. One of the things I would love to see happen is greater awareness, even at the level of the parliamentary members. There is a relationship between a data controller and cybersecurity, and so greater awareness in the public would be beneficial. The member is not here, but there is a relationship, and it would be good if greater awareness takes place.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Barkley. We spent over an hour on this, but I felt it was important. I mean, this thing came into effect 2020, but when I was last in government, up to 2016, we spent a lot of time preparing and getting the legislation in a position to pass it. So I've been very personally involved in this, and I think it was important for, while you were not called before us, but for the committee and the public to know the challenges that you are having in being operational, and that's why I've devoted this time to it. Commander Gale, there were some follow-up questions. If you want to stay, Ms. Bartley, you're free to, but if you want to leave, I don't think there are any more questions for you, so you're free to leave. Commander Gale, there were some follow-up questions that you need to address coming out of last week's meeting before we get to the substantive matter.
Thank you, Chair. The first of the lot, the number of starting devices received, including those procured, donated, and how those have been deployed. So in total, based on our records, what was received by the GOJ is some 896 Starlink devices.
Member Brown, I want you here, because this was one of your questions. 896 in total?
Based on our records, yes,
okay.
Chairman. Of that number, this includes the 200 procured by the entity. In terms of distribution, we had distributions occurred through the Jamaica Constabulary Force to just about 75 recipients right across MDAs, individuals, member of parliaments, councillors, and also to particular institutions that were supporting the relief effort. In terms of the records indicating to whom those are distributed, those that have been delivered by the relevant party to the AUGD's office. There's a requirement here to update on the approximately 80 starting devices which are remaining in storage at the Office of the Commissioner of Police. I will indicate that based on the records also contained, there are today 100 devices in storage. Those devices are serviceable, i.e. they can work.
Sorry, just so I'm following you. The report spoke to 80 at the Commissioner's office. This is an additional 100 now.
No. So it said approximately 80. I'm indicating that 100 are in storage.
Okay, so it's not 80, it's 100.
It's 100.
Okay, okay.
This would have been, some would have been returned since issuance, hence the number here indicated. All the devices by the necessary reports are serviceable, i.e. they can work. If you plug them in, they'll turn on. The matters concerning provisioning, they can be quickly provisioned as a matter of putting the kit number into the relevant portal, and the entity which we then which they be distributed to would cause for that activation to occur. It's a matter of minutes once you get onto the...
Sorry, just so I'm clear. So let's say, we are in a hurricane season, and let's say you have an event and you have to deploy those. The entity receiving it would be able to just plug in and have it operational, or would they have responsibility to deal with the subscription service related to?
For that 100 in storage, I'm trying that there's no subscription on it, and that the relevant entity as it stands today will have to treat with the subscription matters.
Or they would have to deal with that?
The other matter was then, well, and just to be clear, so the ODPEM would have received some 55 distributed to us from the JCF. Of that, currently, we have 40 which are already provisioned on a month-to-month detail, and the other 10 in reserves to be activated as and when becomes necessary. In terms of the verification of the status of food items, tarpaulins, and water.
Hold 1 second. Member Brown,
Yes,
just
for
seeking clarification.
Yes. So you said 896 were received totally, based on what you're
based
reporting.
on our records, yes.
200 were, of that 896, 200 were procured by ODPEM.
Yes.
Of that 200 that were procured, 100, the 80 plus...
No. So what I'm indicating is, of the total number of 896, 100 devices remain in storage.
That is the 80 plus an additional 20.
Indeed. Approximately 80 plus, based on the initial report, approximately 80 were in storage. I indicate that there are 100 in storage.
Okay. The 696 that the ODPEM does not have did not procure, in terms of the deployment, you are unable to speak to that.
To bring it in context, member, the deployment, storage, etc. of these devices to the Ministry of Energy, Transport and Technology was handled by the Jamaica Constabulary Force. So we had no direct hand in the distribution of these devices.
Okay.
All right, go ahead, Commander.
The last matter here, Chair, is concerning the verification of the status of food items, tarpaulins, and water vials, approximately $60 million, which was not recorded in ODPEM's inventory. We do have the evidence, and that was shared late this morning concerning the inventory records in our accounting system. So those matters would have been recorded into our accounting system as indicated earlier.
Okay. All right, I have 2 follow-up questions from last week in relation to the Support Jamaica website. When a donor, for example, somebody decides to give money via their credit card, let's say somebody comes on the site, decides to give $100. Which account does that $100 go into?
So the the processing of that matter goes through a submerchant agreement that we have with our financial institution. Those monies, whether they be Jamaican dollars or US currency, goes into ODPEM owned accounts at a financial institution that we have an arrangement with or have bank accounts with.
All right, the partner, the telecoms, the technology provider, who is the partner, is there a charge to the government of Jamaica per transaction that is done?
And you're speaking to the platform provider?
Yes, the platform
No,
provider.
This is, as mentioned, we have access to this for a year, royalty free.
Okay, so there are zero charges, and all monies donated go directly into ODPM accounts, not to a provider, then the provider sends it to you.
The financial service institution, there are the necessary charges that would come out of the amounts.
What would those be? For example, those are transaction charges?
Transaction charges. Transaction charges. There was the issue concerning, as indicated in the report, the matter of holdback for overcharges, any matters concerning fraudulent concerns on accounts and so on. That matter, all the monies have now been transmitted to us, and we are working with the provider to come to an amicable agreement over the withholding of funds, if necessary. That should be in place.
When you say provider here, you're talking about the
financial service
the financial institution.
Indeed.
Okay.
I don't know if the Commander Gale answered, well, I didn't hear it clearly. So the chairman asked if all of the monies went into ODPEM related accounts, just for clarity.
All the monies have gone into ODPEM related accounts.
Okay.
Okay. All right, members, are there any follow-up questions? We're now going to the substantive matter. Taking us a little while, but, oh, sorry, Mr. McAdam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on the question you asked, the response is actually in the report before us today in relation to the charges associated with donations. So based on the evidence available to us, there's a 3.9% commission that is charged, plus GCT that is charged by the financial services institution. And in addition to that, there are also transaction fees. So if you look in the report that is before us today, there's actually a table in the appendix with the gross donations, the commissions, the GCT, and the transaction fees outlined in that table. In the appendix to the report, Appendix 1. That's the 16.1 million is the amount that was withheld. Right? That's separate from the
that's
commission.
separate from the charges.
Separate from the charges.
So, okay, so my question, following up on what you say then, when we report, for example, of, I think it is 1.4 billion that would have been donated, is that a gross figure or is that a net figure?
That's the net.
That's a net figure having accounted. So is there a specific figure on apart from the 16 million in dispute, of what constitutes the total charges so far?
Right, as I indicated, it's in the appendix.
Well, if you can help us, because we may not have it in front of us, just if you could indicate what that figure is in terms of those charges.
Okay, so based on the report, up to February 2026, the gross donations received was 72.4 million Jamaican dollars and 1.4 million US dollars. The commissions charged was 2.8 million Jamaican dollars and 55,640 US dollars. GCT, 423,000 Jamaican dollars, 8,346 US dollars. Transaction charges, 182,000 Jamaican dollars, 3,214 US dollars. And the amounts withheld as at that date was 16.1 million Jamaican dollars and 309 $100,000 US.
My question to ODPM, acknowledging that at the outset you wouldn't have been able to do this because we had an emergency, but have you done any comparison to determine whether the arrangements with the financial institutions are the best that the government can get in terms of the percentage charge, etc., at this point in time?
We are undertaking that now, Chairman, but we have not gone the way of changing the financial services institution as yet.
Well, I mean, even though you haven't, you should do a little shopping around and find out whether you can get something more attractive, given the nature of this, the website, and the fact that this is something that you want to continue to encourage persons to participate in perpetuity, because we will always have the possibility of future events. And so it's important that we are getting, government is getting the best arrangement, even though, as I said, we would have been obligated at the outset, given the emergency, to make a decision on a financial institution. But it's important to know that we're getting the best possible arrangement here. So
noted, Chair.
Just a clarification from the Auditor General. I'm trying to reconcile the figures you just gave, and unfortunately I don't have the appendix in front of me. But on a prompt, on a key finding one, it said ODPEM had received approximately 1.44 billion in cash donations. And then you went on to break out Jamaica and US. But it didn't seem to add up
to the
1.44 billion. And you were talking as at February. Both are as at February. The second thing is you spoke to GCT, which I assume would only be the GCT on the fees charged by the financial institutions. Because I don't think GCT would be charged on a cash donation per se. So I'm assuming that the GCT, so I'm just asking you to clarify that for me. But the first question is, the figures didn't seem to add up to the 1.44 billion.
Right, so that 1.4 represent donations through the Support Jamaica website, as well as direct deposits to the account.
Okay.
So donors were able to make deposits directly to the ODPEM bank account,
so
rather than going through the Support Jamaica.
Okay, so that would not have attracted the 3.9%.
No, because it is going directly to the
3.9% is donations made by credit cards, I assume?
Through the Support Jamaica website. All donations through the Support Jamaica website attract the 3.9% commission.
So that's like a vendor discount on the credit card. I'm trying to understand, what is the 3.9%? It's charged by
It's charged by the financial services institution.
By the banks, so to speak.
No, well, it's not a bank in this case.
It's a payment, it's like
it's a
Stripe
payment
or
portal.
one of those.
Yes. So ODPEM can explain the agreement in terms of the partners, but the financial services institution would be responsible for processing the collections and then transferring the monies to ODPEM's bank account.
That's why I asked you the question where, maybe I should, one second, I should repeat. If somebody goes on the site, wants to give $100 with a credit card, but you said it goes straight to ODPEM's bank account, not to a third party.
Well, there would be a provision, and I'd have to just double check here, Chair. They will hold whatever money is required and then send the rest of the money directly to us.
That's what I thought. That's why I asked you the question, because generally, whoever the provider is holds it, takes their fees, and then sends to you the net amount. That's why I asked you, well, can you tell us who the provider is then?
So this is the LASCO Financial Services Institution. I don't want to call the name wrong, but it is provided through LASCO.
Which you don't want to call the name.
Okay, but I mean, this is
Hold
not
on,
secret.
Mr. Chairman. The Auditor General typically does not name names in their report. But when the specifics are asked in this committee, the names are given. It's not a secret. You can't provide oversight if you are hiding stuff from us. So the chairman asked, who is the financial service provider or financial service institution that is referred to by the Auditor General in his report? Please answer the question.
So to repeat, Chairman, the Alaska Financial Services Limited.
Okay. So we have an arrangement then with them to process transactions through the website. They collect the money initially. They would take their fees and then remit the net amount to the ODPM account. Is that the arrangement?
That is the arrangement, Chair. But if we look at the report as well, there was also some withholding of some amounts for chargebacks.
So that would be in a case, so we keep it simple. Somebody use a credit card, send $100, but then you find out that that credit card dispute there. So the chargeback would, or the holding of is it 16 or 18 million? 16.1 would represent cases like that.
Or the amounts that they would have presumed to cover in these cases.
Or the amounts what?
They would have calculated to cover the large amounts given what they were taking in. As we could understand, this was significantly more than perhaps what they would have been collecting on other platforms. Hence, the amount that was held back for chargebacks and such alike. We have subsequently had conversations around the modalities of that occurring, and cause for us to enter into very separate discussions regarding amounts and times for holdbacks. But as it is now, we're not engaging in a process of holding back.
All right, so just so I'm clear, because I'm not sure if I followed you carefully, how close are we to resolving the 16.1 million, which is in dispute?
Well, those monies are not in dispute, Chair. We do have those monies in our bank accounts.
Oh, they are in your bank accounts. Okay, so they're not being withheld then?
Not being withheld.
Okay. And based on, I would say, just rough math, probably 95% of the funds which came into ODPM, or 90, would have been through direct deposits to your account. Okay, if you have 1.4 billion and only 72 million J plus 1.4, maybe about 80, a little lower. The majority of the funds, vast majority, would have come through direct deposits, which makes more sense to ODPM, but for the donor, they would have to pay the fees on certainly sending, the wire transfer fees. Let me ask you, is ODPM charged a fee on the receipt of those funds through the wire transfers? Because in many cases, if somebody sends a wire to an individual, they both pay a sending fee and then the recipient also pays an equivalent fee. So are you being charged by the institution when those funds reach your accounts?
No, Chair, we're not being charged.
Are you sure about that?
Based on the information that we have, we're not being charged.
Okay, all right. All right, I'm going to go just, members, I'm using the prompt provided by the Auditor General's Department, and I'll just go finding by finding, and if members have questions, the key finding number 1, low utilization of donated disaster relief funds for Hurricane Melissa and Beryl. All right, in the verification on page 3, it says, for the Hurricane Beryl donated funds, ODPM is yet to present records of the total funds collected or expended. When would ODPM be in a position to fulfill this requirement?
Just to confirm, Chair, we're speaking in terms of monies collected for Hurricane Beryl.
Yes, yeah, I'm just looking at all right, I'm on, for members, this is the briefing report. I don't know if you have a copy.
No, Chair, we don't.
Can we just, so that you can follow us, do we have any extras there? that we could just give Commander so you can follow us. So I'm on page 3 of the report. Under verification, at the bottom. So for Hurricane Melissa, it said you presented a schedule showing expenditure, blah, blah, blah. But then for Hurricane Beryl, it says you are yet to present records of total funds collected or expended. At the bottom of page 3.
So for Hurricane Beryl, we should be able to indicate the bank records for those donated. What I'll indicate to the best of our knowledge, no money was expended from the funds donated for Hurricane Beryl. And I believe we had indicated such in previous answers to the actual report.
Okay. But Auditor General, Mr. McAdam, you would be awaiting what? Just proof of that? Is that what your comment on the verification would indicate?
Right, Chair. So we did not see how many, in terms of donations for burial, we did not get any evidence to substantiate the total donations. Unlike Melissa, we were able to go on and see how much was collected.
Oh, you're given a figure, but you want the documentation
right,
to substantiate it.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Chair, so we will be able to provide that. And bank statements and so on to support that matter.
Okay. The key finding number 2, donated funds retained by financial services institution without a formal agreement. When I look at I'm on page 4 now, just so you can follow. It says a formal agreement for the retention of funds was still not in place. Where are we in terms of formalizing that agreement?
So we're having the discussions, I believe, Chair, I still don't want to put a time where I think we should be able to conquer this issue in just under a month. But as it is indicated here, the monies which were the point of query have been lodged into our accounts as of March this year, and we're having the discussions around those points.
Okay. Key finding number 3, this is the National Disaster Fund Statement of Accounts and Annual Report not prepared. And again, I'm looking under verification. Timeline for completion of required audited statements and annual report for NDF was not provided. Who would, in this case, Mr. McAdam, they would have to engage private auditors to do this audited report? Who would do this audited statement?
So, Mr. Chair, under the Act, it is actually the minister who would be responsible for appointing an auditor.
Which minister? Finance?
Minister of Finance.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so the Minister of Finance would need to appoint an auditor to do the audit of the
audit, yes.
Okay. So that is something, Commander, that you need to have dialogue with the Financial Secretary for that to be addressed.
Chair, this matter will be treated with through the NDF committee, which is
Okay.
now in place to have the auditors appointed.
What we would like to know is a time frame for, you'd obviously have to consult with the NDF, but a time frame for when that audit would be done.
I would have to revert, Chair.
Yeah, I know, I expect you to. Sorry, I see Member Miller, your mic is on.
Yes, Chair, you moved a little fast.
Sorry, I
Just
didn't,
know,
yes, sorry.
I wanted to find out if a formal agreement is now executed with the financial services institution. I went back to finding number 2, where the Auditor General pointed out that there was no formal agreement for the retention of funds.
So,
By the,
through you, Chair, there was always a formal agreement with the FSI. There was never a formal arrangement concerning the retention of funds. And what I
Correct.
indicated just previously was that we are now in the discussions around that, and I expected that within perhaps a month, we should be able to conclude on that, and then we're required adjust, if necessary, the current agreement with the merchant.
So there was no, in that formal agreement with the financial services institution, there was no clause to say the amount they're supposed to retain. Am I correct?
No, there wasn't not prescriptive to the matters of chargebacks.
Very well.
I would say, before you formalize that, I think it would be important to find out what other institutions are providing and what their charges are to ensure that you are, in fact, getting the best possible deal given the nature of this type of activity and the fact that you want to retain as much of the funds as possible. Sorry, go ahead, Member Miller.
Can ODPEM also confirm that all the funds collected is now in the government's account?
Yes, ma'am. Relevant to the necessary accounting charge and so on, all the monies are now in our accounts.
Sorry. Yes, Member Bunton.
While we're still on prompt 2.
You can go, yeah.
I'm a little puzzled at this original proposed 45-day time frame to retain 30% of all donations. What's the logic of that? I mean, now, in the old days, you used to have to wait for checks to clear and so on, but these are all predominantly electronic transactions, which might have at most a 1-day delay. Why was there proposed a 45-day time frame to retain 30% of all donations? I'm trying to understand the logic for that.
Chair, I wouldn't presume to speak on behalf of the institution. This was something that was sent to the previous finance officer in an email. I can't recall that they would have provided the explicit reasons behind it. I could go down the road of some assumptions around it, but I'd probably want not to, Chairman.
So what's the current agreement in terms of the time frame for retention of funds and what percentage?
There's currently no agreement around that matter, Chair. Operationally, based on our discussions, we have suspended that matter until we come to some formal agreement.
But let's say there is a hurricane, God forbid, next week. What would happen?
Based on what currently obtains, less the necessary accounting fees, we will get the funds.
So this is not in effect then, this 45-day hold of 30%?
No, Chair, this is not in effect.
No, but there's no agreement in effect. So, no. As I understand it.
There's no agreement around the retention of funds in effect.
So if there's no agreement, then it could very well revert to the 45-day time frame. What I'm saying is...
It's very generous to the provider.
It's a very generous arrangement.
To the provider.
To the provider.
Not to the government.
Let me reframe this then. Why would you not have an agreement that compels the provider to make the funds available within a very short period of time? And I would think that would be a matter of a few days, not 45 days, certainly not a week. I mean, you know, you have RTGS, you have ACH, none of these things take a protracted period of time. Banks are phasing out checks altogether. So I don't understand why there's this long retention period. This reminds me of the days when I just joined banking and a foreign check took 30 days to clear. But there's no justification for this in modern times.
To you again, Chair. So this is the matter we're trying to quickly round out and to make operational.
I would like you to revert back to the committee in writing on two things. One is having done a scan of the environment of other institutions to determine what the best offer is, and then to indicate what agreement you end up with. Because I understand doing something in an emergency, but certainly reflecting on this is not beneficial to ODPM, the government, or the people of Jamaica, or the donors. for any institution to have a hold of 30% of your funds for 45 days. In this environment, I can't see any justification for that whatsoever.
Noted, Chair.
One second.
Yes,
Chair,
Member Miller.
Chair, I want also to, on your same point of the 45 days transfer period, if I'm looking at these dates, it went further of an 83 additional days. So there was a 45 days for time frame to retain that 30%, but also it went further than that, an additional 83 additional days. What is the explanation for ODPEM's failure to enforce that agreed 45 days? Because the institution would be holding that 30%, while there are persons out there that ODPEM could help, and they're holding onto that money for an additional 85 days.
Ma'am, the explanation redounds to what would have been an administrative oversight in the matter, and the necessary steps have been put in place to ensure that we're accurately tracking the funds to the extent that we now have all those funds in our accounts. Changes have been made in the department to cause for us to have significantly more oversight in these particular matters.
Let me ask, just on that, what is the verification process on your part to determine that 50 donations of $100 were made through the provider? Are you in a position to independently verify that from whatever the provider indicates to you?
Yes, Chair, we are able to independently verify the relevant amounts that should be coming to us.
Okay. And you have, whether it is monthly, quarterly reconciliation process with the provider to determine, that X amount should have been remitted and that is actually what you have received?
So we have started that process and we are doing that on a monthly basis as we speak, Chair.
Members, anything else? Okay, Member Miller.
Yes, Chair. It boggles my mind. Why is it the Auditor General could not confirm the ODPEM's bank account number for the funds that were transferred? Why is it the account numbers were not reflected for the funds transferred from the financial services institution? Which account it went to?
This would be under
I'm reading it, and
yeah.
I believe the indication here from the AG is that the transfer receipt did not disclose the recipient's bank number. I doubt it's a condition where the Auditor General is unable to otherwise confirm the bank account. I believe this is prescriptive to the receipt itself not having the recipient's number on the receipt itself. It's not a case where, and maybe they could indicate, I believe records were shared with the AUGD to confirm our bank account number.
Mr. McAdam, I don't know if you can just help us on this particular one, maybe to highlight what the concern was. Is it that the funds could have gone to a different account apart from the ODPM, and whether you were satisfied with the explanation provided by the ODPM?
Right. So at the time of the report, Chair, we asked for evidence to prove that the monies were transferred. We were provided with the transfer receipt. That receipt did not indicate the bank account number. Subsequent to that, we received the bank statements, which confirmed that the monies were transferred. So as indicated in the prompt, we confirmed that the monies were transferred in March 2026.
Okay. Okay. Members, anything on I'm moving from number 2 to anything under number 3 with the statement of accounts and the annual report of the National Disaster Fund. And just for clarity, and this may be you, Ambassador Meade, the NDF would also have funds that would be donated by multilateral institutions, countries that may want to give donations. Would the NDF be the repository of those funds? that would come from those sources?
Yeah, actually, the Director General formed the Secretariat for the NDF, so him and his financial officer who is here is the chair.
Okay, so they can
could
answer.
better answer. But
Sure.
my understanding is that, yes, there can be multiple sources, but it can be clarified further.
Chair, so the NDF is, it is possible for the NDF to accept donations. That is the bottom line up front. In this case, the operations of the fund were held separately, where it is that donations specific to Hurricane Melissa went into a donation account and not the NDF.
But what I'm trying to understand is best practice going forward. Again, you know, we don't want a weather event, but let's say we have one, and countries from across the world decide we're going to provide in cash terms, not goods and services. Where would those funds naturally go? Wouldn't it be the NDF?
No, historically, based on my short knowledge of, they have gone into donation accounts. The matter you raise is something that could be discussed at the NDF committee and how to treat that going forward.
Okay.
The NDF normally is a matter of investments directly from government into that fund.
Sorry, repeat?
Normally, it's investments that drive that fund. We would get a subvention for it, and the monies are invested.
Okay, okay. Sorry, Mr. McAdam.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to follow up the DG's comment, one of the challenges up to this point in time is that the NDF does not have a dedicated bank account. And that was highlighted in the report. So that would sort of restrict the
So that answers
inflows.
my question.
Yes.
Okay.
So traditionally and historically, the donations went into the donation accounts, US dollar, Jamaican dollar donation accounts, and then a decision is taken whether or not to use those funds accordingly. Since the report, I can confirm that ADPEM has taken steps to seek permission to get a dedicated bank account for the NDF. The timeline, however, was not provided for that.
Are you in a position to provide a timeline on that, Commander?
No, Chair. There are two modalities to it. We have to wait on the necessary permissions to come up, but we continue the dialogue with
You have to wait on the necessary?
permissions.
Or permissions?
Having written. So we'll
Okay.
continue the dialogue with the entities. But just to maybe add a little bit more context to the AUG's comments, DD's comments, it's the operational account for which there is the matter concerning its own account. The investments accounts are very separate. So in terms of the investment accounts, those are solely for investments. It is the operational account, i.e. the cash account from which we operate on a daily basis, which has another pool of funds in there which is not being used.
No, so just what you're calling the operational account, where in the key findings 3 it says ADPEM has not established a dedicated NDF bank account as required by the DRM Act. That bank account is what you're calling the operating account?
Yes, ma'am, that's what I'm referring to.
And to date, that has not been established?
It has not been established.
Why, Mr. Chairman, in that same paragraph, though, I mean, it points to a whole series. This is not an isolated element or an isolated case of non-compliance. Apart from having years without a functioning fund committee and chairman as required by Section 42 of the DRM Act, one of the alerts, I think, to the public and to Parliament is the lack of annual reports being submitted on a timely basis. And, you know, this is something that we, you know, I have commented on repeatedly in a number of committees and in the House itself, that we go many years without departments and agencies who are required under law, or statutory bodies who are required under law to do annual reports. And, sometimes we go 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years without getting those annual reports. We see right here from 2018-19 to 2024-25, those annual reports were not prepared. Again, preventing compliance with Section 42.3. Permanent Secretary, how have you tolerated this habit of this total, habit of non-compliance with the relevant legislation?
Chairman, through you, member, very good question. I can account for the period that the agency has been with me, and as soon as these matters came to my attention, the necessary steps are being taken to address them.
So where are we now in terms of these annual reports? At the time of February, I think would have been the date that the Auditor General did their review. You still had from 2018-19 outstanding. Where are we now? Or can you give us some sort of schedule in terms of bringing these annual reports up to date?
Chairman, there are, to the best of my recollection now, 8 reports outstanding. The first 4 we have gotten some feedback on. So it's a matter of concluding the relevant corrections to those where necessary. I would indicate at this point we're trying to have those within the next 6 weeks completed and submitted to the parent ministry.
All right, let me ask a question. Is it the Ministry of Finance that is required to provide permission for the establishment of the separate account? Because, again, looking at the key findings, NDF transactions are instead commingled with the Japanese International Cooperation Agency-funded Improvement of Emergency Communication Systems project within ODPM's capital account. Although approval was sought in February 2019, 7 years ago, to open a separate account, no formal response was received. Who is the permission sought from to open that account? Because this is 7.5 years old. Would it be the Ministry of Finance? Rather?
It is the Ministry of Finance, but I can't see if the law requires them to open this account. How can, the Ministry of Finance say no? I mean, it would seem to me that just compliance with the law requires this account to be opened. I'm struggling.
Well, you could help us, Madam.
Right. So the request normally goes to the Accountant General as a Treasury, and then the Treasury will respond. Sometimes they seek additional information from the Ministry of Finance, but it's the Accountant General who would give that information and that approval.
I mean, it is mind-boggling for a country that has weather events every year that a request to have a dedicated account for the National Disaster Fund would not be responded to for 7.5 years.
In violation of the law.
In violation of the Disaster Risk Management Act.
Seek further information as it relates to that period and the requests.
So, Commander, you have made a more recent new request.
Yes, Chair, we have.
When was that request made?
Earlier this month or late last month? I'd have to double check the dates.
Okay. I mean, this unless I'm missing something, this one seems inexplicable, quite frankly. It's to open a dedicated account for the National Disaster Fund to prevent commingling with another project that is funded by a donor agency. I can't see why this would not have been done a very, very long time ago. And, yeah. I would ask you to provide an update on that issue in writing back to the committee. I do expect you to be back here in person, but you can send your response to the committee.
Noted, Chair.
All right. Any other questions on the key finding number 3? If not, let's move to key finding number 4. The roofing procurement suppliers without PPC or TCC certification. How, again, I know we were working within the confines of an emergency, but I noticed there was no response provided on this particular issue, Commander.
I believe, Chair, we would have provided a response in the initial matter to AUGD, where it is that we would have relied on guidance note number 2, 2025, issued by the Ministry of Finance on 12 November last year, pertain to how we should treat with those matters. Prescriptively, the contractor in this matter would have fell within the necessary guidelines that allowed for us to offer them the contract.
Without the TCC and the PPC?
Without, at the time, having had it, because they would have had it within the, I believe the guidelines speak within the last 12 months.
Okay, so it's just that at the particular time of the awarding of the contracts, they may have been out of date or had not renewed it.
Indeed, Chair, but they would have had, as per the guidelines, within the prescribed period prior to the award of the contract.
Okay. All right. Well, that should have been, yeah, I was going to ask, was that was provided to you?
Well, it shares the last line. Well, sorry.
No, the Auditor General's report has it in it. I think it's there.
Sorry, Chair, it's actually in the report.
Yes, yes.
Yes. Usually we would include a summary in the report. At a glance, highlighting the specific finding, whether or not it meets the criteria, doesn't meet the criteria, or it partially met the criteria. In this case, we indicated in the report that this met the criteria.
Okay.
Right.
All right. It's just the prompt. Maybe the prompt was misleading to us, where it said no response provided.
No, but this is in relation to PAC. The response here is
it's in the
relation to
AG's
PAC.
report. It's in the AG's
Okay.
report.
All right.
Right. So recall, Chair, before a report is tabled, a response would be provided by
No, I know.
the ministry.
Well, maybe there was an oversight in the prompt, so let me accept that there was an oversight in the prompt.
Right.
Because what is here said no response was provided, but you're saying the report has it, all right? So we accept that.
Right.
Okay, all right. Member Brown, yeah.
Yes, I understand the provision, as was mentioned, guidance note number 2, which allows for the incorporation or inclusion of those suppliers who would not have satisfied neither the Public Procurement Commission certification or TCC. I am a little bit, one of the suppliers, supplier number 3, I believe, the value though was 56 million. So while I understand the provision is there which permits engagement of non-registered or tax non-compliant suppliers. Is it, the first question to ODPEM, is it that we had a shortage of suppliers who would have met the criteria of compliance, why we had to seek this extraordinary request and permission as granted through the Finance Ministry?
I believe at the material time, Chair, the quantity of material that we're trying to source, it would have been hard to get it from, it ended up being in lots. And this provider was able to provide that requested amount. I believe there were 4 other suppliers involved in the arrangement, and we had to, as the circumstance required, get in the material very quickly. Hence, we would have chosen to go in that direction. They could have provided what was required.
Okay.
Member Miller, I see your mic. Was it on before, or you have a specific question here?
Yes, Chair. What, in light that these suppliers didn't have their TCC and PPC, what due diligence did ODPEM carry out to ensure that they were able to provide what is required?
So these providers would have been notable providers based on our due diligence, and we'd have also ensured that they would have in the last 12 months also, they would have had the necessary documentation in order to supply the materials required. Sure.
All right. Key finding number 5, delivery verification and payment documentation deficiencies. Again, in our prompt, Mr. McAdam, it says no response provided, but what, did you receive a response in your report?
So, Chair, in the prompt, this is referring to the response to the PAC, so just for clarity. In doing the report, we received responses.
To your satisfaction?
No, that's why it's in the report.
Okay. So the verification says the outstanding signed delivery slips or good received notes, 34 million, were not presented. The relevant payment documentation for contracting commitments totaling 167.3 were presented and verified. Is there an issue, or what is the issue in providing the documentation for the 34 million?
These are pertinent to countersigned receipts, Chair. I believe might have been as a case of not having wanted to, having noted and confirmed both through internal and external means that the goods were indeed presented, not having to want to then go back on the same receipts and then do a countersign much later than on the prescribed date. But they were reviewed.
How would you have verified that they were in fact delivered?
So through an internal check and also through the third party who would have also received the goods at hand.
Okay.
So the receipt,
when you say third party, the prompt says it's to the JDF locations.
As in, the usual concept is that both ODPEM representative and the representative from the Jamaica Defense Force, i.e. the third party, would countersign the goods delivered. In the, I believe it was on two occasions, operational circumstances that have prevented the ODPEM from having been on site at the time of delivery. But through internal and external checks, i.e. with the JDF and also through our own systems, we did verify that the goods would have been delivered to the site.
So I know you're not here representing the JDF, but I think both yourself and the permanent secretary have a little familiarity with that organization. Is it usual that they would accept supplies delivered and somebody not sign for it into a JDF facility?
So to be clear, Chairman, the document was signed as having received.
By
the JDF.
By the JDF.
By the JDF. What didn't occur was that the ODPEM representative was not there at the material time.
Well, that's not what the prompt says, though. It says, goods received note count. The remaining 34 million was not supported by signed delivery slips or goods received notes countersigned by ODPEM or a JDF representative. That I am reading that to say that neither an ODPEM nor a JDF representative verified those deliveries. So but maybe that's my reading of it.
Yeah, and it says leaving those deliveries unverified.
Unverified. So my interpretation of that plain English sentence is that neither a JDF representative nor an ODPEM representative could verify those deliveries.
Clear here, Chair, you know it's written, but I can indicate that the documentation that was presented did have the signature of the
Well, can you, Mr. McAdam, can you then provide some clarity on that for me?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As indicated in the prompt, as well as in the report, in our review, we found approximately $88.6 million worth of supplies were indeed acknowledged. However, the remaining 34 million, we didn't see where those were acknowledged by either JDF or ADPEM.
So, Commander, what the Auditor General is saying is different from what you are saying. You said you feel confident based on your internal checks that they were in fact received, but the evidence has not been provided to the Auditor General to their satisfaction on the 34 million.
Right, so Chair, what I will do, I'll have the document as I saw it presented. But as indicated, there were physical checks subsequently to the matter at hand, and we are confident that even with if the document didn't exist, that the delivery was made to the Jamaica Defense Force.
All right, but again, for the purposes of the Auditor General, whatever supporting documentation you have, you need to provide it to them so that this issue can be closed out.
We treat with that, Chair.
Member Cousins?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. I am noting that the relevant payment documentation for contract commitments were totaled $167 million. I'm seeing where the delivery verification was roughly 122.5 million. So I just want some clarification, perhaps, from the Auditor General's Department, whether or not there was 167 million that was paid to the suppliers, but only 122 million verified thus far. If that is the case, then what is the situation at the balance between both?
All right, so just for the sake of completeness, that 167 million has actually been verified based on what the information in the prompt. So ADPEM provided...
Mr. McAdam, I think the issue we're having then, maybe, I don't know if the prompts are up to date and reflective of your current status, because what is here says something different.
No, Chair. If you look on the thing that says verification,
Yeah.
it says the relevant payment documentation for contract commitments totaling 167.3.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Right.
So what I want to be clear on is whether or not the suppliers received this 167 million.
So at the time of the audit,
Yes.
the expenditure was classified into payments and commitments.
Yeah.
So at the time, we saw payments of approximately 26.2 million and commitments of approximately 141 million. Subsequent to the report, we have seen the payments for all 167 million.
Okay. And so having confirmed that 167 million was paid, we're only seeing $122 million worth of goods delivered thus far, based on the report.
At the time of the audit,
At the time
only
of the
122 was delivered.
Oh, so perfect. So the question now turns to the Permanent Secretary and ADPEM. Have you now received the entire amount of goods and services totaling 167 million?
Chair, through you, yes. So this is the basis on which the payment is actually made. Payments are made post-delivery and confirmation of delivery of the goods.
And this was delivered to the JDF offices and countersigned by both
As
JDF
indicated earlier, Chair,
and ADPEM representative?
based on my records, there were 2 instances which they weren't countersigned.
And this information was provided to the, as a response, perhaps, having been a live issue coming out of the audit, did you seek to provide an update to the Auditor General's Department as it relates to the difference that was not yet delivered but has since been delivered? And if that's not the case, then perhaps we would love, Chairman, for ADPEM to provide us with some further documentation and verification of this. It's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's extremely important. Because even though the audit, it is a live issue when you look at the audit. Right? It's a live issue. And therefore, I believe that through you, Chairman, we need some further information on this. Because this is very important. We're looking at roughly $50 million. I said, between 122 and 167 is about what? 43 million dollars worth of goods and services. Well, goods, really, because it's materials. And having regard to the previous issues that were highlighted by the Auditor General as it relates to the 122 and the outstanding.
Speak closer to the mic so we can.
As it relates to the 122 that was previously verified, and the issues that arose from that audit, is that we'd love to get some further and better particulars as it relates to this additional $43 million worth of goods that were delivered to the JDF's offices.
Yeah. Anything else, Member Cousins?
That is
You're on number 5. No, he's on number 5.
That's the chairman.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Any on key finding number 6, the roof restoration program?
Yes, Chairman.
Yes, Member Brown.
All right. So I wanted some, I don't know if ODPEM or there are representatives here from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. No, there are no reps here from Labor and Social Security. Are there any? No. All right. The finding of the Auditor General indicated that no documentation was provided on beneficiary selection under the roofs program, the assessment process, and how the actual, selection process was executed and how beneficiaries were determined. If no documentation existed, Commander, on what objective basis were the beneficiaries chosen?
Chair, the matter of selection of beneficiaries is one that the Ministry of Labor and Social Security treats with. They do have in place their robust mechanism for it. I would rather not speak on behalf of that ministry. What occurs in the project cycle is that there is a request from the ODPEM, and they would supply to us the relevant particulars for the persons who are deemed beneficiaries, and then we will transmit that to the project implementers for them to effect the project on the ground.
So you are basically saying that this finding of the Auditor General in her audit of the overall process would not have application to ODPEM?
What I'm saying here is that the process of selection is carried out through a different ministry.
Okay, so it's not your requirement to provide, as is a finding, documentation in terms of assessment, documentation in terms of selection as the finding?
I don't retain those of how the selection is made or the criteria used. I retain the outcome of the selection.
All right.
I have that in my possession.
So, AG, is it that you're finding on the specific, the roof restoration program is misdirected to ODPEM?
Thank you, member. Not necessarily a member. As a matter of fact, I'll refer you to Appendix 4 in the report, where we actually wrote to MLSS for information in relation to the selection criteria. However, we didn't receive a response from MLSS.
Okay.
Right. So the report documents the steps taken to get the information from the other partners in addition to ODPEM.
Okay. I mean, Chairman, this is a very major issue in terms of us as members of Parliament. I mean, I am from a constituency that did not have a lot of damage, but I did have several constituents who lost their roofs. I think the official government report is that some 24,000 had total destruction, and then close to 130,000 had their roofs completely removed. So when constituents come to us they see others getting the benefit, and they come to the Member of Parliament to ascertain the criteria. They would have been assessed, their roofs would have been, them house blow down, them roof blow off. So I don't know if it is that we need to bring the MLSS here for that, since it is not in the purview and direct control of ODPEM, but it's a matter that requires, this finding is very fundamental, and it's a matter that requires understanding, clarity as to the criteria for selection, criteria in terms of the assessment, and ultimately the beneficiaries. We see here 507. 507, as the ODPEM reported in phase 1, or 504 in phase 1, is but 2.1% of the total, destruction so far in terms of total destruction. So I see phase 2 is coming, but there is a clear need for us to understand who gets what and why do who gets what, and who answers that question for those who were the victims of Hurricane Melissa.
Yeah, I think that would be directed to the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, given that ODPEM is acting in concert with that ministry in terms of the delivery of the services. But I do think certainly for representatives, it is important to know the process and the criteria for selection, so that at this level there is understanding and that communication can take place to constituents.
If I may just add, I think the member who just spoke is from the St. Mary area. And from my recollection, I don't believe that ODPEM had anything to do as far as with the JDF completing roof repair, that it had anything to do with the constituencies outside of the West. So maybe I misunderstood your argument.
No, but I don't know.
Maybe
that
I misunderstood, because he did mention, for clarity, not to have the Jamaican people believe that this roofs program was where the JDF was actually repairing roof right across Jamaica due to Hurricane Melissa. Again, maybe I'm misunderstanding what he said, because he mentioned his constituency, and that only 500 and odd roofs were repaired. Yes, a lot of people were damaged, but I want to make it clear that the JDF, they were not repairing roofs this side of the country, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I know, it was only in a certain section of the island.
Yeah, but I don't think the member's question was only about his constituency.
Well, he should not have mentioned his constituency.
No, but he has the right to,
Well, you're here to represent everyone. However, you cannot.
I'm here as a member of the PAC. You don't
Yes.
know why I asked a question.
Well, I'm trying to clarify that they were only repairing roofs in the West.
And that's fine. And as I said, I don't think the member was just speaking on behalf of his own constituency here. Member Miller, and I see Member Cousins in terms of questions.
The roof restoration program, I noticed that it covers St. James, Trelawney, Westmoreland, St. Elizabeth, but there's no mention of Hanover. I must say Hanover was one of those parishes that suffered and was battered by Hurricane Melissa. Is it that no roofs were repaired under this program during your phase 1?
Chair, we have not repaired any roofs under phase 1 in that parish.
Why is that? Why not?
As mentioned before, the selection criteria is done through another ministry. What I'll indicate, Chair, if we recall, the shelter recovery program has about 6 different modalities. It's not only the government-directed roof repair program. There's also the roofs program, which is the cash grant to repair roofs. There's a matter through the NHTE for other modalities, and so on. So it is not only the government.
Members, let's just hear.
So it's not only the government-directed roof repair program.
Member Flynn, just allow the commander to speak now. And let me say, members have a right to ask questions. No, they have a right. Member Corporate Fernand Miller, allow Commander to speak. I don't want the crosstalk. Just allow Commander to speak.
What I indicate through you, Chair, is that phase 2 does include the parish of Hanover in the initial set of beneficiaries that we would have gotten. There are some beneficiaries from that parish.
Who is determining these things? We need to know.
So is it the Ministry of Labor that determines which parish or who would benefit under this program in a particular phase?
So, Chair, through you, having done their own vulnerability assessments, they come up with a ranking, and they provide to us based on their indication as well of participation in the other programs who would benefit coming out of this particular program.
I see Member Cousins, then Member Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. As it relates to the roof restoration program, just to clarify that, there was actually $400 million of donated material separate and apart from the 167.3 million procured materials that were utilized under this phase, correct?
Approximately, yes, Chairman.
In terms of the 400 million donated materials, where were these materials stored? Were they stored at the very same location of the Jamaica Defense Force?
Through you, Chairman, yes, they were, and then dispatched to the relevant build-out sites as required.
So, having regard to the fact that you have $400 million of donated materials, and of course you have $167 million of procured materials, I'm looking at the report, and it appears as if there was some, I would say, commingling of sorts of the materials, because based on the report, there was nothing that was presented to substantiate the actual repairs that were carried out by the 167 million. Why was that so? Didn't you see it prudent to ensure that for the procured materials, there was a separate arrangement to ensure that you could track it properly and for the principles of accountability and transparency to be able to account for these materials, having regard to the fact that you already have materials that were donated, separate and apart from materials that are now being paid for by taxpayers?
I do believe, Chair, we are able to track where the materials would have gone in terms of conducting roof repairs, in terms of the separation squarely down the middle, in terms of those primarily bought through the GOJ and those donated. Where there are gaps, that is what we're looking at in the project management cycle, which will sort of hover over phase 2 of the program, some gaps being identified.
There was a foreign military support team. I gather that some materials were perhaps donated from Guyana, I believe. Did that foreign military support team, were they confined to utilizing the materials that they donated, or were they provided access to the procured materials? Because we could start there in terms of identifying, separating who received what and what went where.
To the best of my knowledge, Chair, the team which is being referred would have done work out in Westmoreland. I believe they repaired 200 roofs. To the best of my knowledge, there was no additional request for material from the ODPEM team to bolster what they would have imported.
So we could separate those 200 then and say the 167 was not utilized in those 200.
We could.
Safely, we could conclude.
We could.
So therefore, it shouldn't be difficult then for the Auditor General to be able, for you to identify, for the purposes of the Auditor General's audit, the homes that directly benefited from this $167 million worth of materials. Because this is what is in the report, so that's why I'm going there. Because the Auditor General is basically saying that there was nothing provided to establish that the 167 million was spent on Mr. John House, Miss Jane House, Mass Tom House. Simply put.
So, Chair,
So I don't know if they tell the Auditor General has indicated that he wishes to contribute to the discussion. So maybe
You want to say something on this particular issue? Is that a follow-up? Okay. All right.
Right, not necessarily this particular issue, just a follow-up to my earlier comment about the MLSS. So during the audit, we had written to MLSS requesting certain documentation as a part of our review. Now, they did respond to say that the beneficiaries were selected using the Jamaica Household Damage Impact and Needs Assessment tool. So that was the tool used to select the beneficiaries. However, we had requested a listing of the approved beneficiaries so that we could actually conduct the verifications to see if the approved persons were the ones who actually got the benefit. That listing was not provided. So just wanted to add that context to my earlier response. So it's not that they didn't provide any information, but the listing that we had requested to do the specific verification of the beneficiaries, that listing was not provided. Okay. But they did respond to our request.
Commander Gale, in respect of the donated materials, 400 million, can you say whether or not we have exhausted all 400, or there are still materials left over from that 400 that was, because we're saying that it was stored at the JDF offices. So can you confirm or deny whether or not materials were left over from that will be used in phase 2?
Chair, I can't specifically state no without further verification if materials left over from the donations are still in play.
Okay. Having regard to what has been highlighted in this report in relation to the separation or lack thereof, in relation to the 167, provided that there are materials left over, what steps are you prepared to take to ensure that there is no commingling of the what is the donated materials and procured materials, to ensure that going forward we are able to clearly identify who has received these benefits courtesy of the tax-paying members of the country? Because that's where I'm going, you know. It's taxpayers' money as opposed to monies donated, and that when it comes to taxpayers' money, we are asking for greater accountability and transparency, because there's a great trust deficit between the people and us, the public officials. So what steps are you prepared to take, or ODPEM, in terms of your analysis to ensure that there's not a repeat of what transpired before?
So, Chair, what I wish to indicate is that the government-directed roof repair program is supported through donated funds. So it is all donated funds that support that program. I just wanted to sort of make that very subtle difference. The phase 2, there were some matters highlighted in the Auditor General's report, and phase 2 will undergo a robust sort of project management cycle around it, to include the independent verification of the implementation being done by the Jamaica Defense Force.
All right, thank you. Member Bunting, I see you have...
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a sentence in the prompt, and hopefully the Auditor General can help me. It says, we're after the semicolon, however, the auditors were unable to verify the repairs on a sample basis because no documentation was provided on beneficiary selection criteria. And it goes on. But my experience with not the MLSS, but the Ministry of Housing, was that they required geotagging of all the locations where beneficiaries were identified to be assisted by members of parliament in this case. Now, even if you don't have the criteria for beneficiary selection, surely you must have had a location from this geotagging, a name and a location, which would allow you, independent of however they were selected, but which would allow you to do some on-site verification of repairs that took place. That, first of all, that these houses existed, and some evidence of repairs having taken place. So I'm just a bit puzzled by, because no documentation was provided on beneficiary selection criteria, why that would have prevented you from verifying that repairs were done on specific houses.
Sir Chair, we didn't have access to the geotagging information at the time.
You did not have access?
No. Subsequently, we have received.
Subsequent. So have you done any follow-up?
Well, we are actually in the process, because if you look at the prompt, we got information for St. James and Trelawney, and we are looking at that information now to proceed further.
Okay.
Member Corporate.
I just wanted to, because I think all members of parliament, we all had to do the geotagging of any house that we found that needed roof repair or just repair in general. But my question is, it may not match. If I had possibly, and I was in the West, 200 houses that were damaged, it would have to match what MLS stated that possibly needed repair from the JDF to say that this is the house, because out of the 200, 50 may be the ones that the JDF would have repaired. So it would have had to match to, as far as the verification is concerned. And so I don't know if we want to necessarily ask that question about the geotagging, because it may not be the same house that the Ministry of Labour or the Member of Parliament suggested for roof repair. I'm not sure if you're clear in understanding what I'm saying.
No, I am, but what
yes,
he
so
said is...
of the roofs repair, as opposed to who the Member of Parliament who received $10 million, whose house are they repairing? Because all the members of Parliament in the West received $10 million for repair of roofs or houses, and us, the members of Parliament coming back this way from Manchester, all received $3 million. And so, again, you know, the members of Parliament could have repaired some roofs that were not completely damaged on some houses, and maybe those were not the ones that were necessarily geotagged by you know, the Ministry of Labour for the JDF to repair those roofs. And so I think we have to be very careful how we're possibly conflating these two, and for persons to not understand how this may work. Because again, you can't deny that you did not get $10 million.
But I don't think anybody is doing that. I think the member Bunting asked a clarification question based on the response from the Auditor General. He says they are now in possession of the information.
Yeah, but I think he also mentioned that there's a documentation that on a sample basis, because of no documentation was provided on beneficiary selection criteria. And so I know, we all know that the JDF were out there repairing roofs. But the members of parliament were also repairing roofs.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you, Member Crawford. All right. I have sorry, Mr. Macadam.
Yes. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, just to follow up in relation to Member Bunting's question, and it's in the report, we did in fact receive geotag information for some of the properties. However, what prevented the verification was the before situation. So the assessment that would allow us to determine whether or not the beneficiary got the benefit that was approved. So in other words, when the assessment is done, a recommendation will be made based on the assessment, and the implementing agency, ADPEM, JDF, would now act on that recommendation. Now, we didn't see the assessment. So even if we go and visit, we would not have known if this person should have gotten this benefit based on the original assessment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't know the condition of the house before, and it would be impossible to have documentation of that before. All right, members Brown, Cousin, and Miller.
Yeah, I just want to, Chairman, to have the Auditor General provide some clarity. I see in your executive summary you said that the audit was conducted on ADPEM in their capacity as the central agency responsible for emergency response and recovery operations. The member from West Rural, St. Andrew, is intimating that there's some confusion. Were you auditing the JDF roof repair project, or were you auditing the operations of ADPEM as it relates to the recovery efforts and the overall roofs program that was being executed by the government of Jamaica through ADPEM?
So in short, Chair, the audit was of the Hurricane Melissa Relief Initiative.
Yeah.
And ADPEM was the lead agency in that initiative.
So all facets.
So, right.
So the reference that the member is making about JDF and roofs, right, you are reviewing all facets of the program.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right, member Cousins, then member Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Much has been said about MPs and what MPs received. But let us look at, for example, Commander Gale, this program, the roof restoration program. We see here it is said that, based on your response, 504 roofs were restored in total. And we have established that it was $400 million in donated materials and $167 million in procured materials. That's roughly $567 million. And when you break it down, just to be clear, it's roughly $1.125 million in materials only that we are saying was utilized to restore the roofs under the program. That's the math. Am I correct?
Chair, that is the ballpark estimate.
So an MP who received $3 million if he was to restore roofs could only probably restore 2.5 roofs. 10 million, less than 10 roofs. Based on, and this is just material only we are discussing.
No, you can't say that because my constituency did
Right?
not get that much damage.
Just continue, member.
Commander Gale.
Sorry, Chair. Chair, that is
Yeah, go ahead, Commander.
That's the average math if you divide it that way. What I would indicate, Chair, is that the roofing size per house also differs. The level of damage per roof also differs. So there are multiple cases. It is not that every house that was repaired would have costed the average.
You see, Commander Gale, that is, your response highlights the problem that we're facing in terms of pre-verification, criteria establishment, and all of that. You see, if we had all of that established before the roofs were repaired, fine, I agree with you. But you see, it goes to the root of the concerns expressed by the audit. And so all we're doing now is speculating in terms of roof size. But what we're saying is what is sure and certain mathematically is that if you average it out, because average is influenced by small and large numbers, the average repair per household is 1.1 million. So it doesn't matter for us to go into the realm of speculation because we dropped the ball in that regard. So going forward, it is your duty in implementing the next phase to ensure that all documentations and there's a clear and transparent process for selection. But I'm saying that it is 1.1 million that was of materials only that were utilized in this program, and Hanover wasn't in it. You understand? So that is it. Thank you, Chairman.
I remember Miller. Oh, so, yeah, Miller, and then you can, after Member Miller.
Chair, the member alluded to MPs getting $10 million to assist with roof repairs. Yes, there was an allocation of $10 million with a maximum of any one person getting $100,000. That's only 100 persons I could help out of the over 1,000 persons that were affected by Hurricane Melissa. So I could only help 100 persons with 100,000 to fix a roof, which that can't even start, right? In addition to which, they have failed to assist the people of Hanover under the roof restoration program. So what happened to Hanover? What's happening? I can only help 100. So when the member is going to talk about MPs getting 10 million like it's a lot of money, that can't help the people of Hanover. Majority of the people of Hanover have not benefited from support. The roofs program, they've selected other parishes, but not Hanover. What about Hanover?
All right, Member Witter. Members.
Let me just.
Members, don't do the cross talking. Just Member Witter. No, you don't respond to everything. Just deal with what is it. Member Witter.
I want to clarify something here in relation to the allocation to the members of parliament, because what we receive as members of parliament, especially those of us in the parishes that were seriously affected, could not do anything in relation to the roofs program. I think that was an allocation that was made in the aftermath, right after the hurricane, so we could respond immediately. Immediately. So that wasn't a part of the rules program. But I just want to ask one question of Commander. Did you do any complete structural repairs for houses that maybe would have been completely destroyed? Or you just do roof repair?
Chair, the program is very directed at repairing roofs, so no structures are involved.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Members, I think we have exhausted. Oh, you have Member Miller again? Okay.
Yes, Chair. I know we are way past finding one, but I want to go back to Hurricane Beryl. Wanting to find out what is happening with the unspent funds from Hurricane Beryl. What is the plan? I think it's over, 138.8 million and US 101,974 from Hurricane Beryl donations. Remained unspent. What is happening? What's the plan?
Chair, the monies from Hurricane Beryl, we've asked the ministry via the cabinet to cause for those funds and the funds for Hurricane Melissa to be regularized into ODPEM's budget for this financial year, and those monies will go to the very same projects that the Hurricane Melissa funding will go towards.
Chair, I think it is cruel that we have this money sitting there from Hurricane Beryl, and person that I'm going to go to Hanover still has not benefited. I think it's a cruel act.
All right. Members, any other questions on the prompt? Member Brown?
Yeah, Chairman, I think I want to close to come back with the point that I made in terms of the ODPEM being the main entity that is charged with the recovery and relief effort. I know the reference is made to MLSS. I know it's a joined-up approach, but there is a need for the answers as it relates to the whole roofs program and project, the criteria, the selection, the beneficiaries. Perhaps we have to come back in September or some other time, but I don't think this should be left unanswered, and the ODPEM as the preeminent entity should come back with us, with the information from the MLSS if they are the supporting ministry in this exercise, because this is a major issue. We have just touched a small fraction in terms of the numbers here, and there are thousands of Jamaicans included in the belt that is most significantly impacted that are awaiting support and solution under this particular project. So in my view, my mind, I don't think we should rest it here, but as the entity, we should come back to get some clarity for the country on this most important program.
Well, I'm looking at Member Bunting, who chairs PAAC and has a little more latitude in terms of bringing agencies to that committee, that this may be something that you could look at. Just to clarify, the basis of criteria, as you have said, Member, in terms of selection. There are multiple programs that are being done, and so people have a clear expectation of what they think they should get and when they will get it. Member Witter?
Yeah, I think you answered the question. That's the point I was going to raise, that I don't think we need to bring back the ODPM here again, because we would have exhausted the Auditor General's report in terms of what was presented, and therefore I think any other matter concerning the rules program would be indicative of what work is yet to be done or is being done now, and that would be very appropriate to be raised through the PAAC and not the PAC. So I don't see where we need to call back ODPM here. I think we would have exhausted all that that we seek to achieve here.
All right, thank you, Member Witter. Members, there are a number of documents which came in early this morning in terms of responses from the OPM and the ODPM to the questions that were asked at the last meeting, plus responses to the queries from the Auditor General. These were provided electronically. They're officially being tabled, and the reason I go through this process, it is important for the public, for having full context, to have access to the responses that are provided. The public has access to the Auditor General's report, but they need access here. Any other business, members? In terms of next meeting, the Parliament is on break. This is our last meeting before the Parliament resumes. So it will be sometime in September or after when the Parliament resumes. Can I have a motion for the adjournment? Moved by Member Bunting, seconded by Member Witter. Thank you very much. Enjoy your emancipendence and have a good break. Thank you.
Justice, I appeal to you, obey the road code, pay your ticket on time, and only go to court if the ticket is being contested. Close to 80% of matters coming to the parish courts are for traffic breaches. Let's work together to make our roads safe and ease the burden on our courts.
It's Tuesday, July 28th. In the headlines, the Education Transformation Oversight Committee Chairman, Dr. Adrian Stokes, says Education Committee alone won't close boys' achievement gap. In business news, big truck and equipment trade show for expanded construction sector. Regionally, MV Barima tragedy dominates Guyana's parliament. And in sports, Jamaica strikes double gold at Commonwealth Games. This is the news.